Welcome to the State of the Nation Weekly Update, brought to us by Pace Car Rental. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and once again we're going to take a look at the news of the week, and that has been dominated by the announcement of the Cabinet within the Government of National Unity. Now, you've all come along the journey with me, where it looked like the Government of National Unity was going to be a great thing, then it looked doomed, then it's come back, and now we have a Cabinet. And we do know that there was some wrangling over positions. There was some wrangling over numbers in the coalition. The ANC was hell-bent on getting the DA below the proportion that they had agreed to in the prior to the election of the president. But anyway, here we are with the DA having got 6 ministries and 6 deputy ministers. IFP have got an important minister and deputy minister, and then we have got some of the lesser parties, Patriotic Alliance and Good, getting 1 minister each, as well as Al Jamar getting a deputy minister. So, a lot to unpack here quickly about this cabinet and what it means to all of us. Well, of course, the big story is, despite all the promises and all the hopes and dreams of us poor taxpayers, this cabinet is very bloated, it is very big, it is very unwieldy, more than 30 ministers. It is crazy that you should have a cabinet this big. Remember, America runs with, I think it's 12 cabinet members. So, yeah, quite a difference, but we are South Africa. We're a wannabe communist utopia, so we have got ministers for every little facet of our lives. So let's see just exactly what has happened here. The ANC found it most important that they held on to what is called the finance cluster. Minister of Finance, Minister of Trade and Industry, everything to do with money. And they held on to it almost to the point where the Government of National Unity was taken to the brink. I'm wondering, really, I mean, Minister of Trade and Industry is very, very, very important. Ministry of Finance, let's start there. Not 100% sure that is so important. And I'll explain to you why. The Minister of Finance can't sneeze without it being all over the newspapers. He can't make a good move or a bad move without it being reflected in things like the exchange rate, the performance of our stock market, the performance of our assets, and that gets a lot of column inches. I'd go as far as to say, you might remember the dark days of Zuma, where we even had one of our least impressive ministers, Malusi Gigaba, acting as Minister of Finance. And even he had no room to move. So the Minister of Finance sounds very important, but there are mechanisms to keep that Minister of Finance behaving properly, even when, in the case of Gigaba, the guy was absolutely useless. He was crooked, and he still behaved relatively well as Minister of Finance. So I don't see that as a massive win for the ANC. Trade and Industry, we do, for the first time, have some movement there. Now, I've often mentioned about the fact that our Ministry of Trade and Industry has always been a committed communist. I don't just mean, you get communists and communists. You get those communists with Versace shoes and, those kind of communists are not really communists. But then you get those ones, as I call them, with the leather elbow patches, and the tweed jackets. Those are the guys you got to worry about. They live in small houses and small cars. They do want to live in Vladivostok. We've had 3 of them. We now have Parks Tau. Parks Tau, remember, was mayor of Johannesburg. He was a pretty dreadful mayor, but at least the city kind of hadn't fallen apart to the extent that it fell apart with some of his successors. By that comparison, it makes him look relatively good. But at least he seems to be quite intelligent. And he is highly rated by people that, certainly within the party, I don't think that counts for a hell of a lot. But at least, most importantly, he is not Ibrahim Patel. So, Minister of Trade and Industry, Parks Tau, but we do have Andrew Whitfield from the DA as his deputy minister. It means that perhaps some of the madnesses and the excesses that we've seen in the last nearly 20-year reign of terror where our trade and industry ministers have done their best to not enhance trade for South Africa may be coming to an end. Younger people, less ideological, a little bit more focused on trade and industry. So I'm quite excited about that, because it's a little bit like when you've been kept in a dark corner and then and whipped. It's quite nice when at least the whipping stops. So let's hope that the Minister of Trade and Industry helps. The ANC has held on to this idea that they need to control the security cluster. Well, I'm not 100% sure what Cold War they're fighting or who their perceived enemy is, but they have held on to the security cluster at almost any price. We do know that there were numerous books written about it, but when Jacob Zuma was president, he was all about the security cluster because he used it for nefarious reasons. It's going to be very hard to do that in future. But in any case, the ANC did a hell of a lot to keep hold of the security cluster, as they call it. And there I find two of their best appointments. And I'm going to explain what I mean. So for starters, we've got, as Minister of Police, we've got Senzo Mchunu. Now, Senzo Mchunu, for those that have been concentrating, was the guy who should have been Secretary General, but for a rigged vote at the ANC's conference in 2017. He was at one point head of KwaZulu-Natal. In order to not stir up a hornet's nest, the result stood, and he never became ANC Secretary General. Instead, he was given the post as Minister and became Minister of Water and Sanitation. And in actual fact, did a hell of a job. He was energetic, he was out there, and he really did, clamp down on some of the graft. So he is, I would say, of all the returning ANC ministers, one of the best. There is no question about it. So he's going to be in charge of police. Well, he can only beat the beheaded ambulance chaser, Becky Cele, who did nothing. So good on us that we've got Minister Senzo Mchunu in charge of the police. And this could be quite a good thing for South Africa as we fight this terrible scourge of crime in the country. We need a police minister who understands. Here is somebody who is liked by all the parties and is highly respected within the ANC. So good chance that this is quite a good appointment. The other major appointment within the security cluster came as a hell of a surprise. A real surprise. And that was that Angie Motshekga, the dour, tired-looking Angie Motshekga that has basically stuffed up basic education for the last 15 years, made Minister of Defence. Now, I think that's great news. I'll tell you why. I think it's great news because, South Africa is still a young country. We still have issues. The one thing we don't want is a strong defence force. We are really not really likely to be attacked by one of our neighbours. Our defence force is in a mess. And I think by putting arguably one of the ANC's worst ministers with no military background as Minister of Defence means that there's very little chance of the Ministry of Defence or the Army or the Defence Force getting organised where they could become a political threat. We've seen that in many countries. We saw it probably best on show in our neighbouring country, Zimbabwe, where despite all the woes, even to this day, the one thing that's very well organised is their army. That is why, surprise, surprise, they keep on winning elections. So by putting the dullard Angie Motshekga in charge of defence means that, we can probably rest easy that for as long as she's there, we're unlikely to have a military coup. So I'm quite happy with that. ANC was desperate to keep hold of international relations, which they did. And there they put Ronald Lamola, who's tipped for bigger things. And I think this is a step forward for Ronald Lamola. And I think he is going to feature very prominently at the ANC's next internal elections. He's clearly the rising star. He seemingly brought some energy to the Ministry of Justice. But him in charge of international relations, okay, That's fine. Do what you have to do. I think for most South Africans, regardless of, when the ANC were crowing about taking Israel to the International Criminal Court of Justice, I think most South Africans were sort of more concerned about the bad economy and 50% unemployment. So you go do you on the international scene. You go tell Vladimir Putin how wonderful he is and how much you love him. That's great, as long as we can get back to business. So they've kept hold of those portfolios. Obviously, we have Gwede Mantashe, who has got Cyril Ramaphosa by the proverbials. So he has to keep him as Minister of Mining, so much so that he did contortions to keep him in as Minister of Mining. And now he's got a new thing called Minister of Mining and Petroleum. Basically, it means all mining and oil. We know that Gwede Mantashe is a 20th century man. He wants coal. He wants oil. If it isn't dirty, he doesn't want it. So he's there. And the only problem is that while he is there, he is not going to help our mining industry grow. That is one of the lower hanging fruit where South Africa could get international money, where we could get investment, is into our mining. While he's there, very little chance of that industry breaking out from where it is now. But he had to be accommodated. It's what he likes. He likes digging stuff. I think it makes sense to him. I think anything more than that is a little bit complicated. Josienso Ramakgopa, the minister who came out as the Minister of Electricity and has been very energetic, and since he's been there, we've managed to fight the scourge of load shedding. He gets that as a permanent role, electricity. And there he also gets a DA deputy in Samantha Graham. So we'll be able to see what's going on within Eskom. But it's a good news story, because if this government of national unity does lead to improved confidence in the country, we could definitely see our economy improving. And if our economy improves, we're going to need more electricity. Lots of factories aren't running right now. If South Africa should get a little bit more vibrant and the economy starts growing, we're going to need electricity. And, let's hope that with this arrangement and the better performance by Eskom, this has helped. So that was really what the ANC got out of this election. And then, of course, there are a whole lot of those other useless departments with no real right to be, women, the Department of Everything But Men, the Department of Planning and Monitoring. I mean, really, these are, you hear about them when they get announced, you don't ever see them again. So anyway, that is where the ANC finds themselves, and great, let them stay there and do as little damage as possible. The one very important department is the Minister of Transport. Now there, once again, the ANC have put in Barbara Creecy. Barbara Creecy is an ANC, stalwart. She's been around forever. She does come out of a finance kind of background. She's been MEC for finance in Gauteng. I'm not sure that she did such a great job, but she was there. She seems to be honest. And she's there replacing the dreadful Minister Sindise Chikunga, who was her predecessor, and really presided over what should be a very important thing, because we know what Transnet is doing and the ports, and that unfortunately in the past the ANC have always put their worst ministers there. So we had Chikunga there. Before that we had the wonderful Fikile Mbalula doing what he likes to do, which is not a lot. So transport, again, the deputy is Mhleko Hlengwa from the IFP. This guy is a future leader of the IFP, and he's going to be a big name on the South African political scene for a while. So having him there as deputy might energize that particular portfolio. Let's look at some of the things that the DA got out of this. Now, when one looks at it, your first flush, you say, well, these aren't necessarily wonderful portfolios. However, they are very important. Home affairs. Who doesn't have a home affairs story? Basic education. In a country with crippling unemployment, on top of it, we've had terrible education. Agriculture. It's the one industry, it's the one sector in this country that provides a lot of employment. Forestry and fisheries. These are all areas where the country is doing things or need things done. Now, it's very interesting because you could look at it another way, especially if one looks at home affairs, basic education. Let's just look at those two for a minute. In both cases, the ANC has had to fight itself. It's had to fight unions that are aligned to COSATU, that don't want to make basic education work, and they don't want to make home affairs work. So now what they've done is they've outsourced the problem to the DA. It gives them plausible deniability. In other words, when the DA plays hardball with SATU, the teachers' union, the Cyril can put his hands up and say, I'm shocked, I'm surprised, but it's not me, there's the minister. And there is a good chance here that the unions finally are forced to come to the party. Because we know in the past, but only for the last 30 years, at the first sign of difficulty, the ANC would just cave into COSATU because they just couldn't afford to lose those votes. So this is a chance. It's a chance for the DA to shine in what are really important, very important portfolios. Basic education, one would imagine, it's a big thing and it's a very emotional thing. Everybody cares about the education of their children. Whoever does well in the Ministry of Basic Education will pluck on the heartstrings of everybody, that's every parent, and there are a lot of parents in this country and they all vote. Who's the minister there? Siviwe Charube. Siviwe has been on this show many times. She's a woman who's very competent, very capable. Let's hope. This is a big job. It's easy to talk well in interviews, but I think that she's got what it takes. If one looks at home affairs, Leon Schreiber, somebody else that we've interviewed, this guy has got qualifications up the wazoo, and one hopes that he's going to be able to govern as well in his portfolio as what he can write exams. John Steenhuisen as the Minister of Agriculture. One doesn't necessarily put those two together. I'm not 100% sure what the thinking is there, because I don't think John Steenhuisen, I think he's got about as much experience in farming as I do. But I think that let's see what happens there. One would imagine that there's probably other people that could have had that position, but John Steenhuisen is there, a very important one. I think will give him enough time to run his party while he runs the ministry. I've got a feeling that is the thinking there. But it's an important one. We get an enormous amount of foreign exchange from our agricultural exports. So we do well in that sector. It's good for the country. I then want to take what I think is the most important portfolio that the DA got, and that is public works and infrastructure. Now, one doesn't think about this a lot. You only think about it when a building explodes in downtown Johannesburg. But this is a vital, vital portfolio that has, once again, nobody in the ANC has ever been prepared to tackle it. That's why at first, every opportunity they get, they've handed this over to somebody else. This time, the job goes to Dean McPherson. Now, Dean McPherson is a young guy, he's under the age of 40, from KZN. He's a real live wire. He has to manage 88,000 government buildings and something like 500,000 hectares of land that the government owns. This is an enormous portfolio. It costs the country a huge amount, and it's corrupt beyond belief. Construction mafias, ghost buildings. We saw what happened in the fire in Johannesburg. Nobody could ever find out who owned the building until later, and the building had been condemned and nobody did anything about it, etc., etc. This is such a vital portfolio. If it does get turned around at all, Dean McPherson will come out with his reputation enhanced, and so will the DA. So this is quite an important portfolio, and I think of all the portfolios that the DA has got, probably the most important. you can't help wondering what the thinking was to make Peter Groenewald from the Freedom Front Plus, somebody else that sat in this chair, Minister of Correctional Services. Well, that one is obviously quite good fun, because it's quite easy to understand what the thinking is there. We are about to see a lot of ANC people go to jail. State capture, the hawks are starting to do their work. People are going to start going to jail. And what that has usually been, what the playbook in the past has usually been an easy one, and that is you just claim that you're sick. We know that Shabir Sheikh was given parole more than 20 years ago because he was dying. I believe he's still playing good golf down at Durban Country Club. Jacob Zuma was on his deathbed. Well, now he can, go and get on the campaign trail without too much difficulty. It's going to be very, very difficult when they arrest Zizi Kodwa and they take him to jail. And now the guy says, listen, I may be 45 and in good shape, but I'm dreadfully ill. Go and tell that to Minister Groenewald. You may have a tough time getting that one done. So, all in all, it's a big cabinet. We cannot but mention that somebody else that we've had here before, Gayton McKenzie, Sports, Art and Culture. I don't have him tipped as the guy who should be doing that. He's a strong man. I think he wanted to get into something a little bit more robust, like police or home affairs or somewhere where he can, patrol borders. I don't see him as a guy opening museums, but hey, he's a smart guy, and perhaps he does do something with a portfolio that I absolutely believe should be shut down. And of course, Patricia de Lille, singing for her supper, gets tourism. I must say one thing about Patricia de Lille, not a big fan, but she does seem to do her job. And people within the tourism industry seem to like her a lot. So, it's a very interesting cabinet. It is way too big. It needs to get to work. The country is desperate for this to work out. There are a lot of vultures circling, waiting for mistakes, waiting for people to say the wrong things. We've had a couple of days of everybody venting, from the unions to the opposition parties, everybody calling everybody else racist. But now the work has to start and the economy has to start growing. So let's hope that we've equipped ourselves with the best possible cabinet. Everybody's going to keep an eye on everybody, and this is going to get warm, as they say in certain parts of South Africa. So, if you want to get going in South Africa, go to Pace Car Rental, rent a car there, and I hope you enjoyed this weekly update. We will bring more news to you next week. Thank you.